Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Inlay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today we have a very special episode. We have our number one guest back with us, Tyler. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I'm doing great. You know, world going to a little bit of a hell in a handbasket, but there's still good things going on in the world, and I like to, stay on the positive side.
That's good. We need positivity these days, especially with what's going on in Canada.
Oh man, definitely.
Tyler, so I wasn't joking about that. I don't know if you know, but you were the number one, you were the first guest. You were on episode one. And so I'm really happy you're back. And for those that didn't watch the first episode, can you tell the audience a little about yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Tyler. I go by Dissident Canada on Twitter and now Rumble. Um, I mostly talk about economics and populism, where the two converge. I try to stick to Canadian topics, but we live in a globalist society, so things spill over. End up usually talking about America because American politics truly love to bleed over into Canada. If you now look at Justin Trudeau making, uh, trying to win the campaign for next year on abortion rights, because he's got nothing else.
So actually, why don't we pick up on that? I've noticed Justin Trudeau does it. Jagmeet Singh does it too. Like they try to pick up these issues and they try to get the people emotionally charged. So on the issue of abortion, Jagmeet Singh gave Pierre Poilievre 72 hours to approve federal funding for it was either abortion or contraception. Um, like, what do you think? It's a winning strategy? Do you think it's a new strategy? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's a winning strategy. I don't think it's a new strategy. I think what their political analysts are doing is looking at the 2022 US midterms and making a false assumption that the Democrats won because of Roe v. Wade being overturned. Um, that's not what happened. The Republican establishment shot themselves in the foot repeatedly by picking establishment candidates over American First, populist candidates, the candidates that were very Trump-like. Like you could see this in Arizona where they actively sabotaged Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake probably most likely won that election anyways. It was probably a squeaker. Maricopa County does what Maricopa County does, which is, you know, how did that article put it? Election fortification. Um, yeah. So I really think that's what they're trying to do is they understand the position they're in. Their liberal politics, left-leaning politics are not working. Uh, they can't lie any harder on the topic of, housing security, housing prices falling, like, or even housing starts, like nobody's buying it anymore. So they're trying to find something they can, emotionally charge people with or anything to get out the vote. And they think that um, abortion is the issue that will get out the vote, which 5% of maybe it's a number one topic for voting. It's not going to be enough for them.
It just seems really desperate, though, because I don't see Pierre Poilievre coming out and saying we have to put a full ban on abortion.
I don't think he would. Like, he's not some staunch conservative. Like, he's not the Canadian equivalent of a deep South American conservative or, a right-wing populist. He is fairly far left. The example I keep pointing to is his right-hand person came out, what was it, last year, I believe, November, and said UBI was inevitable. Like, that's not a conservative position whatsoever.
Who's his right hand person?
Oh my God, what's that lady's name?
Landsman? Are you talking about
I think so.
the lesbian?
Yes. That
Yeah,
one.
Melissa Landsman.
Yeah. Like, wherever he's talking or whatever, she's right there. She's like, I would make the assumption now that if he was to get elected, she'd be the deputy prime minister for optics, because that's the game the conservatives always like to play, is optics, which, they consistently lose on because they're playing to, lefties with their optics instead of the center and to the right.
I was going to follow up with a question on that. Bruce Party made an observation that all of our political parties are progressive. So whether it's NDP, Greens, Liberals, or the Conservatives, and he goes, if the Conservatives are progressive light and they're playing in that progressive game, they're not going to win, because if someone's going to vote progressive, there's other more progressive parties. So he said there's really no future for the Conservative Party. What's your view?
Oh, I totally agree with that. The conservatives are destroying their party by consistently going farther and farther left. They're pushing out even the pretense of being conservative. I like, if you're on the left and your choices are NDP, Liberal, Conservative, Green, you're gonna pick anybody but the conservatives, because there's they they sometimes say conservative things. And to the modern left, anything that is not as far left is not tolerable. So you push out your base, you try to market yourself to leftists, but you still try to keep some of your base, and you end up being the party of no one. It's the equivalent of what the American Republican Party is doing. You've got the likes of Mitt Romney, Nikki Haley for sure. Like, why continue to follow the losing strategy when politically in the entire West, at least as far as I can tell, is the winning strategy is to be more like Donald Trump, to be populist, stay maybe slightly right to the center, and be reasonable on basically everything.
If we were going to help out the Conservative Party with some advice, like, what would it be? Because Pierre Poilievre is probably looking, all right, I'm hemorrhaging voters on the right, but if I step, 1 inch to the right, the CBC is going to crucify me. So, like, what can he do?
I would stop caring about mainstream media at all. Like, pay them no mind, and just do more of what RFK Jr. is doing every podcast, and just be out there with the people, talking to them. Don't show up like Jagmeet Singh talking to the people wearing a $10,000+ Rolex. Come in jeans, nice t-shirt, and don't talk in slogans, because I think there's a lot of people now that are extremely pissed that all he does is talk in slogans. There's no depth to the guy. He just says, and I saw this quite early on in COVID, is like, we want paychecks, not credit card debt. Like, that's all he had. He just kept saying that and saying that and saying that. And now we go to, today, and it's axe the tax. It's like, okay, but if we just look at the numbers that the Liberals are using, which is government numbers, which I don't trust, the carbon tax is, what did they say? The last update they gave was 16% of the price increases. Like, sure, help Canadians out, but 16% on like 3 to 4x price increases. There's a lot more you can do.
No,
Like
I mean,
actually have a platform. Don't just
I hear. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go. I was done. I was gonna just continue to ramble.
No, it's fine. You're the guest. You're free to ramble.
Well, again, like he's got slogans. At no point does he talk numbers like in detail. Like Maxime Bernier, his tax platform. I'm in favor of it to a certain degree. I think we can actually axe income tax altogether and still have a functioning government, because there are better ways to get money than from the people. We could, like my platform that I would pick, I actually do have a video on this on Rumble. This is in Canada. You can check that out. It's called, what did I call it? It's a framework for a great Canadian economy. And the back half, I talk policy that would be hard to implement, but doable. And my tax policy is real simple. If we just let businesses do and implement, say, just a 10% flat corporate tax, we don't have payroll tax, we don't have all that nonsense, and we trim government to a reasonable amount, we can totally survive off that 10% corporate tax rate without income tax. And because Canada, unlike the majority of countries, has an abundance of natural resources that are not being dealt with. And then once you have, you tap these natural resources, you have primary manufacturing where you turn them into, actual goods that can be used. So you mine steel or mine iron, and then you turn it into steel, and then you can have tertiary manufacturing and turn that into actual goods and services. Like every country has done for thousands of years, except, the 20th century, halfway through, we said, let's go globalism. Let's make the third world our manufacturing base and completely gut our economy.
I hear you, and I think we talked about this last time. Implementing that in practice would probably be really difficult. Like one thing you touched on was labor regulations, unions. Like they drive up the cost of manufacturing, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Like you go from, if you take, there's a reason why getting manufacturing built in Canada, specifically Canada, is too risky for a business. And it's why if anybody, the big guys, say Hyundai or Toyota, they get massive tax breaks, and not just tax breaks, but they actually do get money, like straight up cash, well, digital cash, but equivalent, from the Canadian taxpayer to build this, to secure a, how would we put it, to make it less risky, because it just drives prices up insanely. Like what is it, Toyota, where is it, Cambridge, does that still exist, or is it the one in Woodstock? That, besides the point, they're paying like at least entry level is like $30 an hour nowadays, if not higher, for a guy that can be almost assuredly mostly replaced by a robot. Like Canada is driving manufacturing to automate as fast as possible, because a
Uh,
robot doesn't take breaks. And paying one guy, $100,000+ a year to be trained in to repair the robot is cheaper than to pay, what is it, 10, 20 people to do the same work.
Yeah, I just listened to what you said, and it seems like I think they call it crony capitalism, but they're picking winners and losers, and the losers are the working class and the middle class.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of crony capitalism. I honestly don't know what to call the type of capitalism we have in Canada, because it does kind of exist as a capitalist society, because you don't have just governments picking, at the local, provincial, and federal level picking winners. You have banks also picking winners. Uh, like, banks don't want to invest in manufacturing in the West. It's risky because it's slow, and it's slow because they have their entire uh, risk profile has shifted from ultra to, so they have ultra safe, like long-term investments, but that's a small percentage. They have some medium-term investments, but most of it is extremely short-term investments that you just run through equity markets, because banks work on this on cash demand system where they don't have, say, the operating capital they need for, say, a week. They just keep it for a day, and then at night you go into the repo markets, borrow money, collateralized loan. So they have to keep paying that back, and that's the entire global system works that way. So any type of long-term investment where you have to put, say, $100+ million at risk for a year or two, it's too slow.
Bringing this back to reality for the audience, when we say we've outsourced our manufacturing to the third world, what the hell are we doing now? Are we just providing the bankroll for the third world?
For the most part, yeah, like, we still have very little manufacturing. It's basically whatever the government can bribe to stay in Canada. Everything else is wherever it's cheaper to do it. Like, India's growing massively because they're taking up the slack of China, because China wants to now move into what the West is and be the financier for the manufacturing base. And it's you're seeing the same things happen in China that you have for the last 30 years in the West, except at a more rapid rate.
Again, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. It's not just that India can do it cheaper. It's also that we're shooting ourselves in the foot with all these regulations and inefficiencies.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just regulations, because if it was just regulations, um, the 80s in New York, there was always a way to get something done. There was always, a massive stack being slipped between the builder, the developer, to some government official to just sign off. Like, bribery is what typically happens, but you're not seeing it really done to any great extent in the West. I mean, it still happens, but it's not like, you know, Ministry of Labor shows up, I'll just hand the guy 10 grand and then we get on with our life. The margins are too slim now to even think about doing that. You have to now abide by these insane regulations.
All right. Well, that's my next question. Last time we talked, you gave a really grim picture of the housing market and basically the permitting process. That was about 6 months ago. How have things changed since then?
Well, really, it's gotten worse because banks now don't even really want to touch real estate at all. I mean, anything outside of equity markets, they are extremely risk averse to. The entirety of the banking system does not want to lend money at all. It's why was it a month or two ago another bank failed, even though technically if they would have gotten a couple $1 billion loan, they could have survived. Nobody wanted to touch that at all, not even for like a severe stake in the bank, you know? And JP Morgan Chase, of all the banks, could have done it. And like their balance sheet, um, they have so much capacity on it to just start buying up banks. I think Jamie Dimon's new business model is just going to be the last man standing and buy up all the rest, which is quite dangerous because instead of, we should all be worried about central bank digital currencies instead of having to deal with, it's about 1,000 or so banks in the United States. They'll have to deal with one. You basically get a central bank digital currency by having, JP Morgan Chase be the last man standing.
They kind of want to turn the U.S. into Canada. What do we got? Like 6 big banks?
Yeah, something like that. And all our banks are totally on board with a central bank digital currency. They're pushing for it because for them, for the short term, it's really good. They get to offload their entire balance sheets, all their ledgers, to the Bank of Canada. So they get to go back to being, 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s, extremely risky. They don't have to carry any of the consequence because they're not in control of their own balance sheets. It's Bank of Canada's problem. They got all the liabilities. We just get to have fun.
I've noticed something's changed since the 80s. Like the 80s and the 90s, Canadians were more sovereign. Everybody paid cash. The banking system, even though it might have the same number of banks back then, it was more distributed. The government didn't get involved. What changed? Was it 9/11?
I don't think we can just blame massive geopolitical things. Like, I would say one of the things is it became extremely easy for banks themselves to be like, to push people into using digital cash instead of real cash. And for banks, it's beneficial because, the less cash you have to have on, the cheaper it is. Like, if we look at what happens when you use a debit card, you go to the store, you buy something, you think money's moved, but money hasn't moved. What's happened is the commercial bank liability that is associated with your account has just been transferred to another bank. And then at, end of banking hours, they net out who owes what. So that's an extremely efficient system. It's bad for us because we lose obviously the control of our money, but we don't have to carry cash. Like, there's benefits to the system and how it works, but I would say the risks are too high because the last thing we want is to have a more Orwellian system than the USSR had with money being, I don't want government to have complete control of money. I don't want banks to have complete control of money because both have proven themselves time and time again to be untrustworthy. I err on the side of, well, cryptocurrency is still relatively new. It does not do everything that a financial system needs, but it does a lot right. If I have Bitcoin in my Bitcoin wallet, and I only keep the password or seed phrase in my head, nobody can touch it. Nobody can move it. They can't say, "Oh, well, now that's not valid money." It's there. I really like that system. It's just there's definite issues with I would say the user-friendly side of the system. You've got crypto scams, but again, the scammers aren't anything new. It's just you've got to be a little bit more vigilant with crypto about it, because if you click the wrong link and you have your crypto wallet on, say, your computer or your phone, it can be emptied extremely easily. But the same goes for uh, your standard bank account, except through the normal system, you have a way of clawing back your money. Whereas in crypto, if it's gone, it's gone. You're gonna rely on someone else to be nice to give you back your money.
Do you have any other problems with crypto other than the security aspect, theft? You could think of it as physical gold. Like if you put gold in your drawer and someone comes steals it. Sort of the same thing. You can't call anybody.
True, but if you have your gold at your house, it's most likely insured.
No, you can't insure gold because
Oh,
gold is money.
seriously?
I tried.
Well,
Yeah. Oh, I
okay,
just
well,
outed myself. Someone's gonna figure out where I live and come steal my gold.
well, I'm of the opinion that like physical gold is the old way of doing things, because, well, specifically, I've been watching George Gammon on Rebel Capitalist and his trip through, was it Argentina, where he wanted to just transact in silver, gold, and Bitcoin, and really nobody wanted to buy gold or really the silver. They kind of took it, but like with a massive haircut. So it's just putting all the theory that people have of like, oh, well, if the system collapses, gold and silver are obviously going to be, a thing. And yes, I do own a silver coin right there. It's a special coin. It's Superman. It's literally got the Superman symbol on it, and there's a silver bullet behind it. Like, I do own silver, but I'm not under the assumption that should the monetary system collapse, I'll be able to transact in it. Because if the system is extremely robust. This is now, I would say, the second major test of the current iteration of the monetary system, 2008 being the first, and it's still kicking. It's going. It's not great, but like everybody's trying to do something to destroy it, and still chugging along. So to actually destroy it and like bring it down would be quite hard, in my opinion. And to think that like people are going to transact in gold and silver when food is going to be more important. Like if things get that bad, having land, a gun, ammo, source of food, water is way more important than being able to buy stuff in gold and silver.
Um, you said the system is hard to bring down. What's going on with the Federal Reserve printing $1 trillion every 100 days in the U.S.? How does that work out in practice?
So first, I would say they're not printing money at all. It's just issuing bonds. So they're just issuing debt. It's nothing new. It's an extreme escalation in printing of debt, of issuance of debt. But as long as the banking system globally runs on U.S. treasuries, they can infinitely print or issue that debt. Like, treasuries are so important in the financial system. As you can see right now, with China offloading, what is it, billions or even trillions of U.S. bonds, and it's doing nothing to help their system. They're getting dollars. They're selling bonds for dollars, but they need the bonds to interact with the system, not the cash. So, we're at the point now in China where they're experiencing outright deflation. Prices are going down. The economy is just there's probably nothing the Chinese government can do about it because they're communists, and communists don't understand free markets very well, or money, or reality at all.
What about the fact that so many people are offloading? Is your camera okay? It's flickering.
Well,
I'm hoping it'll come out okay in the final product.
whoa, okay. Might be having a cable issue.
Oh, there it is again.
Let's see.
We'll add this to the blooper reel.
Okay. Let me see if I can unplug it and plug it back in.
I see you're an expert technician. Oh, I'm getting a notification. It says your browser is preventing you from recording. I believe we didn't lose your footage. It uploaded. So you can try reconnecting. Yeah, this usually happens when you run out of memory or disk space. It's one of the two. Make sure you're drunk when you're installing it. Hey, Tyler.
Hello, I'm back.
All right, I'll keep an eye on if there's any more notifications. The video is still recording, so Tyler, my follow-up question: what's going on? What about the fact that so many people have offloaded U.S. assets, like Saudi Arabia, in the last, I don't know, time frame, 6 months, got rid of 45% of their U.S. held assets. I don't know what assets means, but like, what's going to happen if we keep going down this road and the U.S. stops being the prime reserve currency?
Well, I would say that's a false assumption that the US dollar isn't the reserve currency, or that it could ever not be in the current system, because as everybody will most likely find out real soon, central banks don't matter. What they hold doesn't matter as long as, here's just I wrote this out the other day. It's a quick snapshot of any given time, the relative ratio of what the money supply actually looks like. There's $100 hard cash in this example, okay? So in this example, there'd be about $900 digital, $1,000 total that you can use. 800 of that is interest, or not 800. Of that $900 that's digital, that's all lent into existence. So you have $1,800 worth of interest payments for $1,000. Okay, it's important. And then if we go back to the hard cash of $100, we have 40 of that is vault cash, so that doesn't interact at all with the system. That just stays in most likely a central bank's vault, because that's an easy way for banks to offload risk. And then of the digital money, that 900, we have about 600 in equity markets. So that doesn't also interact with anything other than, keep the S&P 500 pumping, keeps NVIDIA high. So we really only have, $360 that the real economy has. And I mention this because for those 900 digital dollars to be issued, you need some type of government bond. And as long as there's government bonds, and the most there are is the United States, like, the system wants US treasuries. As long as that happens, and as long as these ratios stay the same or relatively the same, the system isn't changing, no matter what a central bank says. Because what does a central bank do? Really, I like, this is a question everybody should ask and look into, because if we look at the Bank of Canada, they stay in line with every other central bank. And what they do is they print 2 to 4% of the hard cash, so banknotes, and just banknotes, a year. That's locked in. That's their target. They stay between 2 and 4% increase on that. And the only other two monetary policies they have are interest rates and QE and QT. And QE and QT really are just asset swaps happening with, another type of bank reserve. That's that digital bank reserve that doesn't increase or decrease M2. It's just a fancy way of saying I owe you something. And like, as long as this system stays in place, like, the US currency is going to stay the reserve currency because it spends anywhere in the world. I can go anywhere on earth. All right. If I have $100 bills in American, I can buy anything. Like, everybody wants US dollars from the banking system down. Now, central banks don't want that, but they're mostly irrelevant to the finance system because finance owns the currency. So, TD has more to do with how many Canadian dollars there are than the central bank does, than the Bank of Canada. We go down to the States. JP Morgan Chase has more control over the US dollar than the Federal Reserve, which, it sounds crazy, but it's how it works in practice, because they barely control hard currency because, well, specifically in the States, they ship out all their hard currency as much as they can through, places like the IMF giving out loans to get people hooked on dollars, which is ironic because everybody's already hooked on dollars. Like, I can go anywhere, even, let's say, Russia, that's completely cut off. If I bring US dollars, I can transact. Even if we, take a look at crypto, US dollar stablecoin, so a cryptocurrency that has the exact same value at all times to a US dollar, I can transact. I can liquidate that and get rubles. It's even to the point where, BRICS is saying, oh, we're transacting in local currencies. Okay, yeah, sure. But the transactions aren't happening at the central bank level. They're happening at the banking system level. So the banks themselves are going into currency markets. So if we look at, say, Russia and China transacting, a Russian bank is going into the currency markets, buying dollars with rubles. It doesn't look like it from their end because it's all back end stuff. all behind the scenes, hidden from view. They buy dollars, and then they move that to China through intermediaries, and in China they then use those dollars to buy yuan, and then they transact in yuan, and vice versa. So all the BRICS nonsense of de-dollarization is actually just increasing demand for US dollars because it's more transactions happening.
One last question on monetary policy, the monetary side, before moving on. Are you familiar with Bill S275?
I did take a look at it. You sent me it. I took a look at it, and it looks. If you're not familiar with central banks, it looks like central banks are handing over control to, some external force. But as I explained earlier, that's already happened. So that doesn't change anything. But it's my thinking will be is they're creating this external committee where it's 9 members. 6 of those members are outside of the Bank of Canada. And I was looking at it, and they're supposedly supposed to be experts in their fields. Who knows if they'll actually be experts or, more along the lines of COVID experts. But all it does is it gives this committee say on like interest rate policy, which is the workaround central banks came up, almost 100 years now to deal with their lack of understanding of money. Like, this is the first time in 80 years where you have M2 in the United States contracting. It's not because interest rates are at 5.25%. It's because money's slowing down in the system. Because if we go back to the 70s where they say, the common narrative nowadays is, oh, the 70s great. It was, the great inflation. But, you had 20% overnight interest rates. So people are paying between 21 and say 28% on any debt that's issued. And yet you have M2 still increasing. So money's still going up. Interest rates don't play a role really in the system. Underlying factors such as how healthy your economy is. And if we compare today to the 1970s, our economy is trash. Like, absolute. We can't handle 5.25% interest rates. They handled, for a decade, 20% is on average from historical norms is about 10% higher. For a decade solid, and still into the 90s where people were still paying close to, you had still 20% loans going out and people were still being able to get the loan and B, pay it. So they're gonna talk about interest rates, fine. Maybe they'll listen to the yield curve, which is the difference between the 2-year treasury and the 10-year. Right now we have been inverted for over 600 days, so the 2-year is it over 5.25% now, and the 10-year is at, I think last I checked it was below 5% or about 5%. So to translate that into what people should interpret it as is not, the bond market saying, oh, interest rates, we're predicting lower interest rates. No. It's growth in inflation expectations are saying we're going to have low, prices are going to come down somewhat, and we're going to see lower growth. Because that's what drives interest rates, is the expectation of inflation and growth.
If you were God for a day and you could, I don't know, wave a magic wand, and like, what would the perfect financial monetary system, banking system for Canada look like?
I don't know if there's a perfect system. If I can quote Thomas Sowell, there's only trade-offs. I think we've learned that the two systems that have been tried, you have your harder currency with, say, gold. You see very little to no growth. And in the current debt-based system, we see massive amounts of growth early on until trust in the system breaks down. And then you see trading sideways to slightly negative for decades at a time. We can see this, the best example is Japan. It's basically been, growth is sideways to slightly negative since 1990 or late 89. And the rest of the West trading growing sideways at best since 2008. Well, I guess 2009 when you have your slight recovery. So I honestly don't know if there is a better system. I would want to say maybe if we had, say, maybe more of a digital-based system, because printing enough hard currency is difficult because it's centrally planned. So it would react either too much or too slow. So you would either have Weimar Germany or Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Egypt, Turkey, where you have way too much hard currency floating around, or you'd be closer to our system where, again, it's like a 1-to-10 ratio of hard currency to digital currency. And like if you had a digital currency, more like crypto, I would say, and it reacted to demand for that currency, either inflating or deflating the amount of, say, tokens or coins on, say, an hourly basis to reflect, what would be economic conditions that might be superior. But again, it'd be very, very hard to find like what is a better algorithm to issue the right amount of currency so that you have at any given time the relative value of your currency is as close to one as possible, instead of you get areas of inflation where it'd be severely less than one, or hyperinflation where you'd be at like 0.000 whatever percentage of one. But you'd also don't want a situation where it would go too high above one, because then you'd have hoarding of the currency, and then you'd have collapse because of that. It's monetary policy is extremely difficult to get right. It's why central banks really don't try. They just stick with their interest rate policies and then run psychological operations, such as like the 1970s is the best, because if you read articles at the time, even the journalists of the time were able to deduce that, well, prices are going up because there's a supply shock of oil. It's not really a monetary problem. We have an oil demand issue. We have too much demand, not enough supply. And in the 80s, when that was starting to correct itself, the problem started to go ease. But because the central banks, and specifically the Fed, have their own PR departments, they ran with, oh, Paul Volcker saved the day. No, the system itself eventually fixed itself. It took time because governments got in the way of solving the oil demand issue.
Here's a hypothetical situation for you. What would happen if, let's focus on Canada, if they got rid of the legal tender or they just said we're going to switch over to Bitcoin, all taxes paid in Bitcoin, and they passed a constitutional amendment saying it's illegal for the country to go into debt. So any public works, you have to get the funding for it up front. What would happen?
Well, I think we'd really see the issues with Bitcoin and transaction speed. Because like transactions are settled every 10 minutes, and now that's faster than the current system because again it takes a day for transactions that everybody nets out at the end of the day. But what happens with the Bitcoin network is because it's actually a relatively small network, you get into congestion. So the way people have solved it is they're like, oh, okay, we're going to create a second network. You can see this in El Salvador. You have the Lightning Network. Well, transacting on the Lightning Network, it's a fairly centralized system, and it works almost as fast as I think Visa's system. So like Visa's credit card system, it works about the same. But they've settled transactions on the Bitcoin network, and it might work for Canada. It's just like El Salvador. Now, I mean, not a lot of people are actually transacting in El Salvador with dollars, from what I meant, or Bitcoin, from what I'm able to tell. Like, you can do it. Whether or not people actually, like, stores actually still accept it it's because the government rolled it out, and there's still serious trust issues with government programs in that country. You can't wipe away, what is it, like 100 years of governments being awful to the people overnight. I do like the idea of any public works, you have to get funding for it. Like, you can't just issue bonds for it and cover it. I think that would actually be beneficial, and you'd be able to get public infrastructure built instead of, I live in Ontario. I will say I live somewhere around the Waterloo region, and for the last decade, they have been trying to increase the size of the 401 highway. It's taken 10 years, and we're at what, 3 or 4 lanes on each side in some places. Now imagine if we go to your scenario and like every driver is like, oh man, I'll give you $10, you could get this shit done today. Get the money, build it. Now obviously you'll probably still have the issue of overbilling for government works, and down here you've got 5 or 6 guys standing around, 2 guys working. You'll probably still have that issue, but at least it can get funded, get done, and the right public works can get done, instead of like what is it, in Waterloo they're trying to build it's like $120 million new high-tech community center, instead of, well, we've got the ones we have, why don't you just give them a fresh coat of paint? Like, the bones are still good, just refresh them a little bit, fund actual activities there for kids to do, because that's basically what they're trying to do. Use that $120 million, distribute it amongst all the community centers and get stuff done. Like, if like the people of a community, they could pick what they wanted done, and I'm all for that. Bitcoin as legal tender, I'm questionable if it would work on any real scale, because we really haven't seen that much adoption of Bitcoin. Again, if you go to Rebel Capitalist with George Gammon, you can see him, was it April and May, he was trying to transact in Bitcoin, and used all the apps, all the maps on the web, being like, oh, you can transact at this store in Bitcoin, and he'd show up and nope, they don't do it. He found one store after going to, I think, 20 or 30, where he could transact in Bitcoin Cash. So while we have Bitcoin ETFs, we don't really have anybody looking to use a deflationary asset as a currency.
It reminds me of this joke. This guy goes up to these two girls at the bar. He's like, "Hey, ladies, I have $100 million in Bitcoin." And the girl's like, "Oh, awesome. Can you buy us a drink?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't have any real money." um,
Yeah.
the reason I asked you that question, it's not the Bitcoin aspect. I was just thinking, in a perfect world, if we didn't have all this lawfare and everything, you could just use Give, Send, Go and just set that up. And, if people want to donate money to fixing the pothole, or if they want to donate money to, I don't know, promotion of LGBTQ in Afghanistan, like they can decide where their money goes. And
Yeah,
you could almost automate it.
or what was that promotion? I think before COVID, Domino's held the promotion where it's like, if there's a pothole between us and your house, call us and we'll fix it.
Domino's Pizza?
Yeah, in the States they held that promotion and they got several thousand potholes fixed.
Can you do that? Can you just, as a private citizen, fix a pothole?
I don't know. Like I've seen, what was it, over COVID? Arnold Arnold Schwarzenegger. He saw a pothole on his road and just like went to Home Depot, bought asphalt and fixed it.
It seems like the right thing for a citizen to do, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a law against it. Probably the unions would be like, "Wait a minute, where's our cut?"
Yeah, or some crown prosecutor sees a video of it on the internet and is like, oh, that's defacement of a public owned thing. So here's a ticket. Or because it'll cost more than a couple $100 to fix, it's Canada's equivalent of a felony, and now you're going to jail for 5-10 years. Like,
I would say it's they charge you under the Terrorism Act because you're blocking critical infrastructure.
see, you could do that too, and then you could seize not only their bank accounts under terrorism laws, but any asset they own. And now the local government's got extra, say 10, or if they own their house, $1 million extra that they can use to do dumb stuff with. They can fly another pride flag over City Hall.
There you go. Money well spent. Let's go down this road. I'm going to tie a couple things together. Let you run with it. The budget came out. They increased capital gains tax. I'm noticing there's a lot of negative PR against quote unquote boomers. I think they're running out of money and they're like, you know what? Well, these guys are old. We got to pay for their healthcare. Let's kill them. And but before we do that, let's take as much of their money as we can. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's a distinct possibility. I mean, MAID is extremely, extremely close to the eugenics movement of the 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. Like, where was is it Denmark where they killed a 29-year-old woman because she was depressed, and instead of looking for cognitive behavioral therapy to get better, the drugs weren't working, so she's like, oh well, time to end it. Like, we've seen it here in Canada pushed on veterans that are having a hard time. Again, cognitive behavioral therapy is basically the only thing that's known to work. It's extremely effective. You can take someone with just say severe anxiety or PTSD and get them to a more or less functional state for society. Now they may not be 100%, but let's say 70 to 80% in 6 months if you do it like every day. But as for going after, the boomers' wealth, I think they'll totally do that to the point where they'll probably just start seizing stuff. Who was that liberal minister that was saying something about all these boomers have, houses and they're renting them out or whatever, and well, we could just take them and use them, put people in them, just seize their property, something like that.
I didn't hear that, but I'm surprised that they're not usually that candid.
He was a little bit um more sly than I make it out to be. I'm just saying what he was actually implying is, we'll do what commies do. We'll just start seizing private property and use it however we want. Is basically the subtext of what he was saying.
I like where this is going. This is another thing I want to talk to you about. This I'm calling it the government takeover. It's a nationalization of land. It's an erosion of property rights, but they're really encroaching on land in a way that they're not doing it with cars or stocks or gold. Like, do you feel that?
Um, I
Do you want me to
I
give you
wouldn't
an
say it's
example
it's
or?
I don't. Yeah, I would use an example. That would be great.
So again, they're not coming out with an act called the Canadian Takeover of All Private Land Act. They're saying if you have a property and it's within, I don't know, 300 meters of a subway station, you must build at least 20 floors up. If some communities are the population's grown, basically immigration, and they're not opening up crown land, they're saying, all right, we're going to take what was originally zoned for one home, we're going to zone it for four, a fourplex or whatever. Now, usually this stuff is pushed through the municipal level. They're centralizing it in the provincial level. So they're doing two things. I'll keep it short. But the one, they're doing it incrementally, so ordinary people don't pick up on it. Two, they're technically increasing the value of the asset, so the people that own the assets aren't complaining either. So you have me screaming at the top of my lungs and no one's listening.
Okay, now that you explain it like that, yeah, I've definitely seen that in Waterloo region. Um, I mean, if you go anywhere near the University of Waterloo or Laurier, you will see homes being, knocked down and they're putting up apartment complexes. To the point where I think it's still in Waterloo, but I think it's closer to St. Jacobs. They've got this plan for a massive 13 building complex. And the proposal is basically the wet dream of the 15-minute city. Like there's everything. There's a certain percentage of the parking is dedicated to EV charging. There's supposed to be solar panels on the roof. There's a spot for public, like those electric scooter things. Like you name it, the complex has everything. And I think it's like I'm trying to remember where it is because it's not. It's currently developed land. Um, it might be a subdivision or something like that, or repurposing of what's it called, commercial zone to that. But yeah, out here there's no new subdivisions. Like the subdivisions that are being built are being they started like a decade ago and they're still not done. The only thing that's getting approved is apartments. Again, if you go to university by the universities, they're you've got developers buying up subdivisions or parts of the subdivision and turning them into apartment complexes. It's quite, I would say, it's definitely setting dangerous precedent, especially because governments it's using the free market to do its evil bidding. Oh, we'll reward you. It's fascism light, communism light, if you will. Definitely see that, and it's really terrible because people don't really want to live in apartments, unless they're in, say, a city. Like if they want to live in Toronto, you're not owning a home realistically. You're gonna live in an apartment. But if you want to own a home, well, you can go out into the suburbs and you own a home. You have front yard, backyard, but they don't want that, so they're incrementally pushing away from that and driving up those costs for those homes.
I just remembered something else you said. You said fascism light. Two other things they're doing. One, in Vancouver, they're increasing the cost for development for their stupid pet projects. Like the infamous case is, we have a bridge here. It's called Granville Bridge. It's just this massive bridge. Underneath the bridge, they thought it would be a great idea to put a chandelier. So outside in the middle of nowhere, it's a dirt patch of road. They have a chandelier. Apparently they had some idea for it. But they do it with other buildings too. They say, we want to beautify the city. So you have to have one art piece here, another one there. It's $1 million a piece. It gets passed on to the customer. That's one thing. So related to that, they're saying, you have to give a certain amount to the city for, the like battered women and, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they've come up with this new thing. It's called low income housing, which is basically the government's getting into the nationalization of land, and then they're subsidizing it with tax dollars. That's what I mean by government takeover, nationalization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, for the last point that you made of government rewarding, say, developers for putting it into low income housing, great examples of that are in New York. Every building that basically goes up that is dedicated to apartments, a percentage of that has to be earmarked for low income housing. So if they're just bringing those policies over, oh man, prices are going to skyrocket. And not in a good investment kind of way, in the way of you're going to force everybody to move to better prospects. Like we see it, Canada, more Canadians are moving the heck out of Canada than ever before. And, to try and stem that, they're bringing in more immigrants, but they're just pushing more Canadians out faster. That's, everybody that can get out is getting out. Everybody that wants to get out is building a plan to get out. I know me and my family are trying to build a plan if it comes to it.
No, it's understandable. So let's transition over to immigration. God, where to start? I'm not even going to recite the numbers. They just came out and they said that they want to take in some refugees from Gaza. And they've also announced that they're using the phrase caretaker. So they want to allow people to bring their caretakers over. Why are they doing this? Are they getting votes somehow?
I don't know if it's necessarily for votes. I think it's another one of those false assumptions of like, oh, well, immigrants make, the economy better. So we'll just bring in a bunch of immigrants, and it's one of those shortcuts. But immigration can make the economy better if you bring in the right kind of immigrant, the one who wants to come here, be Canadian, and be highly productive. Sure, bring as many of those people as you want. They're net positive for Canada. But that's not what the Liberals are doing. They're doing basic leftist logic of, oh, I see someone, they're in need, whether or not we can actually help them, we'll just bring them here. They'll be better. It's Canada. Canada's better than, Gaza. Some places, maybe. But like it's the false assumption that all immigrants are the exact same. Like there is a reason why the neighboring countries around Palestine do not accept Palestinian refugees. The Jordanians don't want them at all. The Egyptians don't want them. The Saudis don't want them. The Lebanese don't want them. The Jordanians have an insane grudge against them because they tried to kill their king. In Egypt, they succeeded. We're not going to see anything really good come from, I believe the number was, they said 5,000 families. How they define a family, I don't know. Like, I know some Middle Eastern people. Their families are massive. Like, this could be, close to 1 million people. Like, it all depends on how they define a family. If you count, you say, okay, well, it's the mom, the dad, and say the 10 kids, but does it include the aunts and uncles and their kids? Does it include grandma and grandpa and all their kids?
Caretakers.
Yeah, again, caretakers. Just they're the caretakers. Just bring them all over. And specifically, the type of immigrants that the Trudeau government is really only accepting is the ones that will rely on Canadian taxpayer dollars to survive in Canada. And they think somehow that's a boost to the economy. Come on. We've all seen, the videos going around social media of, some recent immigrant being like, hey, check this out. You can go and get free stuff here. You don't have to work or whatever in Canada. If you're an immigrant, you can just go get the free stuff.
Yeah, there's other worse videos going on too, where they say, the guy in India is bragging about, like, come here, we'll give you fake documents so you can get into Canada. That's also a problem.
Oh yeah. What was the example I was thinking of?
Tim Hortons.
Those Indian students in what is it? Is it Prince Edward Island? Where they were like, hey, why do we have to pay more for post-secondary schooling? The answer is because my parents paid taxes, so that pays for the school. Like, basically every post-secondary school in Canada either gets federal funding, but definitely gets provincial funding and municipal funding. So yeah, Canadians should pay less. You didn't pay into the system, you don't get a free ride. You don't even get a discounted ride. You pay double.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question. I don't want to give up on immigration, but we'll come back to it. Sort of related to that, Jagmeet Singh, he said the parliament should acknowledge the genocide in India in '84 or something of the Sikhs. I asked around. Apparently, there was some, genocide-ish going on, but like, is this something Canada should get involved in?
No. Canada should not get involved in anybody's problems, like any other country's problems. We've got, since, let's say, what is it? Let's say 45 of the US getting involved in everybody's problems. Is the world any better? Are we any safer? If we go to, the invasion of Iraq, is the Middle East any better? Iran was kept in check by Saddam Hussein. This is going to be unpopular, but like Saddam Hussein, evil guy, he kept the more evil Iranian regime contained to Iran. We didn't have Iran, driving prices up globally because they're given rockets and suicide drones to crazies in Yemen. Saddam Hussein was able to keep Iran in check. Bad foreign policy, if you wanted actual stability, was to get involved. Like, Canada should stay out about everybody's problems. We didn't get involved in Vietnam. We didn't get involved in Iraq. Let's keep those policies of, we've got issues at home. Maybe you make a statement on it if it's important. Say the Ukraine war of like, hey, we want peace. Do the Viktor Orban thing of, all we want is peace. We don't really care how we get there. Let's just have peace because it's better for everybody. I'm a practical kind of guy. If I was prime minister, I'd be trying to work with Putin. Putin's not the greatest guy on earth. Neither is Xi Jinping. But like, the reality of the situation is they're in charge of those nations, and we really shouldn't be ramping up tensions because the consequences are way too high nowadays. If you want to go back in time and say you wanted to get involved in France and England's war, the consequences were big, but it wasn't like we could legitimately wipe out the entire human population on Earth at this point. Not just with, let's say, nuclear weapons, but we have biological weapons that could do it, and there's probably at least one type of space-based weapon that could do it from the US. So maybe let's not, piss everybody off to where we're like, you know what, gloves are coming off, let's go. This isn't an old school hockey brawl. Like, let's try and keep everybody at least tolerating each other's existences. We don't have to get involved in your stuff. You don't have to get involved in my stuff. You go do whatever you want to do wherever you are. Putin, you want to stay in Russia and create a sovereign Russia that wants nothing to do with the West? Do it. Don't care. Israel, Palestine, we're not going to be able to negotiate that at all, because I don't think there's an example in history of a third party that has no knowledge of the local culture successfully being able to negotiate anything let alone a long-lasting peace.
I'm getting really sick and tired of this Israel-Palestine conflict. They've been at it for what, 70, 80 years? And every time, like, we get dragged into this financially or the news cycle, like, they just need to figure out a way to resolve this. We're throwing money at it, and we're just creating this meat grinder that's going on forever.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, the only reason I care about Israel and Palestine is because the ramifications of it. Like, if the Israelis start to lose, do they actually do they use their nukes? Because that's a distinct possibility. What happens if they use their nukes? Does anybody retaliate? Like, that's all I care about. I just don't want this to spiral. If there was no chance of spiraling, I'd just say, let them fight. See who wins. And then make peace with them. Do I think we should, give them money or weapons? No. Definitely no to the money. And on the weapon front, I'll sell them weapons. That's fine. Beginning of World War I, World War II, Canada made a killing on selling weapons to the British. To the point where the British only paid off their loan for the weapons for World War II in 2018.
Really?
Oh yeah, it was that long. And we gave them pretty good terms, considering in World War II, after Dunkirk, the British Army was knocked out. They were done.
I was at a conference on Saturday, and this guy was talking about geopolitics. The guy was a total expert, and he said that the last nuclear test was at some point in the 90s, and there was this ambassador that worked for Nixon, and he was saying, like, the people that are in charge of the military now have no concept of how powerful these things are. Like, you know how many megatons, and you see a movie like Terminator 2, and you kind of think like it's a big bomb. But apparently, like, this thing, you drop one in the middle of a battlefield, like 90% of your army is just gone. So I think that's part of the reason why America is just inching towards war with Russia.
Well, the other thing is, the Pentagon, their nuclear doctrine states that nuclear war is winnable. Like, this isn't something, a new concept to them. Like, you go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis and you read what the, what is it, oh my God, what are they called? The Joint Chiefs. What they were saying, we strike first and we'll just storm Russia and win. Like, they were legitimately arguing with JFK to be, yes, just let us launch the nukes, we will win. That is their position, and the Pentagon's position has not changed. They still think that nuclear war is winnable. When one of the craziest things about nuclear weapons is all our data, up until recently, was based off of calculations done from reading, going frame by frame in the film that we had from the earlier nuclear tests. And it wasn't until, I think, 2008 or so, some nuclear physicist in the States, maybe South Carolina, maybe North Carolina, he got all the film and digitally scanned it and tried to redo the calculations to be like, are they more or less powerful? And I haven't seen the end result of his research. I'm not even sure if he released it. But the fact that we really don't know how powerful these things are is kind of crazy.
This guy on Twitter, he left a comment and he said that his grandfather was part of the invasion force of Japan after they dropped the bombs. So I don't know, let's say Hiroshima. He said his grandfather saw the train tracks. The train tracks had melted into the ground. Like, that's how much energy. And that was like a 50 kiloton bomb.
Oh yeah, nowadays what they can do is insane. Like, one Ohio class nuclear submarine could, in theory, destroy a country. You know, it's got 16 or so warheads on board, and those warheads are, I think they're called Trident warheads. They on re-entry, they break up into multiple different sections. Yeah, and that's just, again, this is what we know about. This is the disclosed stuff. The one thing I'm worried about is I think it's maybe a frigate, but it could also be an aircraft carrier the United States has. The documents that have come out about it's nuclear powered. The interesting thing is it has 3 nuclear reactors. Primary, secondary, and a tertiary one. You don't need a third one. You have your primary and your backup. Plus, it has diesel engines. So what's that third one for? My best guess is maybe a rail cannon of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, if you believe in the idea that they use movies to prime us for what they have, there's that, right around when that document leaked, was that the first or second Transformers movie where they're like, oh yeah, this is the thing that's got the rail cannon on it.
Well, I'm not a military expert, so I can't weigh in either way. But the gentleman I alluded to on Saturday, he said that there was an incident where 2 incidents, but basically Russian planes. One of them was Putin's plane flew. Did you hear about this? Flew over the naval vessel, and the power just went out. The U.S. naval vessel, and so this ship was adrift. And when it got up to port, somehow the like 75% of the people on board, they resigned. They're like, this is ridiculous. Like, if we go to war, we're basically dead.
Yeah, I've heard all kinds of crazy stories. You know, spend enough time on the internet looking for WMDs of some variety, you'll find something. Yeah, but I would, instead of like actual nukes being dropped, I'd be more scared of, say, like a false flag, because we've seen those attempts being made, you know, in Ukraine with I think the brigades that were doing it were Azar and Azov, you know, the neo-Nazi nutters who think crazy things, but they're the only ones that were crazy enough to fire live artillery at, was it the Zaporozhye power plant, nuclear power plant? to blame it on the Russians on multiple occasions, not just, hey, we did it once. We did it like 3 or 4 times. I'm more worried of that because I don't think really, other than say the Pentagon, but the mitigating factor of the Pentagon is the CIA. They kind of want to continue to do their operations around the world and not in a post-apocalyptic Fallout world. But like a false flag, again, I think that's a higher risk. I still don't think it's likely that World War III is close to happening. And I say that because like nobody has the weapons production that you would need to maintain a campaign of any real time. Like, there's an article at least monthly now of NATO's running out of weapons and they can't build enough. Like specifically the Patriot missile system. I think before Ukraine it was approximately 250 missiles a year that they could build, and they're working up to 500. And that's Lockheed Martin and Raytheon building those, and they can't get production up. Those are two massive corporations. And even if you look at like say Russia, who makes as much artillery in a month as the West can do all year, it's still not enough. Like if we just go back in time to World War I, artillery is still extremely important. And in World War I, like you look at the battle of any real big battle, like Passchendaele. Oh my God, now I'm blanking on all of them. My history teacher failed
Vimy
me.
Ridge.
Yeah, Somme, Vimy Ridge. You're talking about millions of rounds of artillery being fired over the course of a month. And then, today's June 6th, we look at the invasion of D-Day, and that was basically the same amount used in a week or so, or about a month-long campaign. It depends on how you define, length, how you want to calculate it. But it's like double or triple the amount from World War I. And then if you look at Vietnam, there's multiple battles that are 5-day-long battles where you only have maybe 1,500 Americans involved, versus 10,000 VC, and it's like, oh, you used 5 million artillery shells plus napalm plus normal bombs. Yeah, we don't have enough artillery. But even if you go down to just say small arms, like just normal ammo for guns, the U.S. has since COVID had ammo shortages. The price of ammo is through the roof, and it's only getting worse. And people want to think there's going to be war. Wars are won on supply lines. Our supply chain is fairly broken. Even, and then plus you look at NATO sourcing. They say they source all their stuff from each other. Okay, then why do the American taxpayer paying $100 for a Chinese hammer that costs $10 at Home Depot? Like the supply lines all go back to China, and you want to poke the Chinese? You want to start shit with them? I mean, I don't think their army's a big threat. I don't think their navy's a big threat. Like if you look at their videos that they release, it looks like those Hong Kong action movies. It's quite silly to watch. They're not a threat. Like, sure they got sheer numbers, but they're not battle tested. Now, again, you've got problems with Western armies being completely depleted, and the battle tested veterans, they don't want to really fight. But like nobody's really in a position to fight a world war. If we look at basically every country now, I would assume you've got the authoritarian problem that you can see in World War I with the Russians. They cracked down so hard, and they left the populace. How would I put it? They didn't have military or police units enough watching the populace, and you had the Russian Revolution. You have those powder kegs are basically in every nation that would be likely to go to war. You think you can get 100,000 Canadians drafted to fight? No, they'll revolt. They don't want to die for Justin Trudeau. Nobody in their right mind does. You think someone wants to die for Biden? I highly doubt now if someone invaded America that anybody would be really willing to pick up arms. They're that demoralized.
One question going back to, you said we don't have enough arms. I'm going to give you two contrasting scenarios. You tell me which one is more the cause of this. Is it that we've destroyed our manufacturing base and we don't have mining and stuff like that? Or is it that we're investing so heavily into very expensive weaponry, like I'm going to play fast and loose with the numbers, but aircraft carriers are $5 billion. Of that $5 billion, 1 is for the aircraft carrier, 4 is for all the other ships that have to defend it. So which of the two do you think it is?
I think it's cost, because again, you go back to the Patriot missile system. Any nation that has been able to compare that versus the Russian S-400 has picked the Russian S-400 because it's slightly more effective, but I think you can get 5 or more S-400 missiles to the 1 Patriot missile. So in the battle of air defense, more is better, and being able to defend, because doctrine is you fire at least 2 missiles per incoming target. So if you can buy 5 for the equivalent of 1, you just win that war mathematically over time. Plus, if we look at the Ukrainian war, it's not a great showcase for these Western Wunderwaffe, as if we're going to take the German word. These wonder weapons are not wonderful. Even if you look at the Javelin missile system, if you read U.S. Army internal documents, they publicly release them. They expect a hit rate with the Javelin missile system in combat versus a real enemy, not terrorists hiding in caves or stone huts. It's like 0.25% they expect effective hits. Their kill ratio with a Javelin missile, I believe it's somewhere around 4% of the hits that make it. And a Javelin costs, I believe it's at least $2 million. It could be 10 million. I can't remember. It's been so long since I was looking at how expensive a Javelin missile is, and the only reason I did that is because Call of Duty made them popular. I wanted to know, every time I'm in a match, how much money am I wasting?
That's interesting. Call of Duty. We haven't been to war when we're referencing Call of Duty. We haven't seen active service. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
So basically, what I gather from you is it's not cost effective, the Javelin versus artillery.
Basically, all Western weapons aren't cost effective versus their counterparts. Any NATO weapon has a Russian counterpart that's built cheaper. And if you're looking at, an extended military campaign, more is better, because attrition takes its toll. Sure, America has something like 10,000 Abrams tanks, but those Abrams tanks take jet fuel to run, and their efficiency is next to nothing, and their armor is not that much better than the current iteration of mainline Russian battle tanks. So you're just getting a worse product that you really can't replace. Sure, they've built up 10,000 of these tanks, but that's over, like 30 years. You get into a major tank battle with the Russians, you could lose 1,000 in a matter of hours. How are you going to replace that? Because with the Russians, they haven't hit peak production. They haven't, warmed up all the old Soviet factories yet. They're at, like, I believe it's less than 40% production.
Yeah, bust out the old T-34 tanks.
Yeah.
I was talking to this guy. I was at some, don't ask me why, but I was at some military conference, and the guy was telling me about the M1 Abrams tank and the jet engines that they have. He goes, you can't do the old school military campaign anymore where the soldiers are hiding behind the tanks because they get roasted. The jet engines. So that's also gone.
Well, you also can't, use them as a front line, mostly because of supply for their fuel. There's numerous firsthand cases that people have reported on the internet of Abrams being basically dead in the water in Iraq and Afghanistan because they just ran out of fuel. They just sat there. It's not an effective weapon system. But again, I don't think it comes to that because the bigger issue is the authoritarian issue with every country. Like, we can go to China. China is primed for a counter-revolution against the communists right now. If they were to have to take, local police and use them as, a reserve military force or even cannon fodder, how long do you think the Chinese populace takes it before they're like, oh, we have a chance here. Let's take advantage. I think that's the bigger calculus that's going on. Like, they'll try and keep the forever wars going, another Afghanistan, or basically what Israel's turning into now. We'll just send them weapons infinitely. We'll give them a couple dozen more rockets or weapon systems, and they can just go fight for another month. The military-industrial complex gets what they want. We get to have the boogeyman of World War III. We get to keep power, blah, 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 but we don't actually do anything. That's my assessment. But, I've been known to be wrong on occasion. And I wouldn't put money on my bets, and that's just because the people in power are not the sanest people on earth. Again, I truly believe there are people in the American government that think, and the Canadian government for that matter, that think a nuclear exchange is winnable.
Okay, on that same topic, and I promise this is the last question. Yesterday, news articles are coming out that Russia is going to do some naval tests in the Caribbean. Immediately, my antenna went off. I'm like, this doesn't sound right. I looked at the articles. Every single one of them is like, a source in the Biden administration, a Biden government official said they're using the word expecting, but am I wrong? Is this actually going to happen?
I just started reading about it before we went live. My first assumption would be this is 2024. It's an election year. Anything that comes out of the Biden administration should immediately be suspect. Even if it's the truth, just immediately doubt it and verify it yourself. This doesn't sound like a Putin move. Like, Putin doesn't make those kind of blatantly aggressive type moves. Like, he'll come out and he'll give a speech and he'll say, this is our red line. Cross it, and we're going to have issues. We may have to look at our nuclear doctrine and see if we're going to use it. But he doesn't say move troops to offensive positions. Like, even if you look at like Russia's relatively recent history, we can go to when they had to go into Georgia because there were CIA-backed terrorist cells operating out of Georgia, causing trouble in Russia. The Russian army went in, they took the territory they needed to do, and then they haven't advanced since. They got the job done, and they stopped. You have a similar thing that happened in Chechnya. Now that's actual Russian territory, but they didn't, make an offensive move towards NATO. They didn't, hey, we're going to move, a couple dozen nuclear bombers closer to NATO. They don't make those moves. The Russians typically make smarter moves than, the Western counterparts. But we look at NATO. NATO has consistently moved to more and more aggressive positions towards Russia, to the point where they wanted to, make Ukraine part of NATO, which is, if you know the history, you can really only invade Russia through Ukraine. So that's kind of why we have the Russo-Ukrainian war again, is because Russia's just defending its best interests of, you're a very aggressive bunch of nations. We don't want to deal with you. So we have to claim this territory so that you can't make more aggressive moves towards us. Like, even when it was the USSR, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, they've had more than enough provocation to say, try and retake Poland. Or any number of positions that they could take. Putin takes a practical stance, typically. Even with this war, okay, he has kept it extremely limited. He knows exactly where in Poland U.S. advisors are relaying data from U.S. spy planes above Ukraine so that the Ukrainians have targeting data on Russian positions. He hasn't attacked those centers yet. He hasn't directly said we're gonna go find the American former special forces that pretend that they're no longer working, that are operating in country. They haven't said, hey, we're gonna go take these guys out. We're gonna, they haven't said we're going to take out the supply lines outside of Ukraine that are feeding the Ukrainians, everything they need. So if this is true, that's a massive escalation and would show that Putin's patience has basically run out, and he would be making this aggressive move to get the United States to realize that he's not bluffing. But I still take it with a grain of salt, because Putin is basically the last statesman left alive that's in power.
Yeah, that's a profound statement to make, but I kind of agree with you. He seems to believe in sovereignty, and I mean it's hard to come to that conclusion because every day we're bombarded with messages about how Putin is evil incarnate.
I mean, he may be evil incarnate, but he can't be that bad if he says no NGOs in my country. George Soros, you can't step foot, man. It can't be all that bad. In his interview with Tucker, he spent like the first half of the interview trying to give the historical context to Tucker in the most autistic way possible. Like, he can't be, the manifestation of the devil if you do stuff like that. Now, he's still a politician, and my opinions of politicians are generally quite low. They're usually not the nicest people. He's former KGB, so he's probably killed a bunch of people. But if we look at, the real politique of the situation, specifically for Canada, the Canadian government could do business with the Russian government, and, we could have friendly relations. There's no real, issue stopping it other than, we should return that plane, waive the parking fees, maybe give him, I don't know, a couple 100 cases of maple syrup. Say sorry, bro.
Yeah. Let bygones be bygones. Here's some poutine. Call it a day. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we're going to start wrapping up the show, but I don't think Trudeau's thought this through. I mean, this guy's a former KGB agent. You pissed him off. You brought a Nazi in just because he killed Putin's ancestors. You seized his property and his friend's property. I'm not saying Putin's going to come and assassinate Trudeau, but I always go back to the Vietnam War, the Afghanistan War. Reagan wanted revenge against the Soviets for what they did to the Americans in the Vietnam War by funding the North Vietnamese.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but wonder how Putin's going to get revenge against good Canadians for Trudeau's follies.
Well, I don't think he'll try and get revenge specifically on all of Canada. He'll probably target it to something that directly impacts Trudeau. He'll probably find a way to cut off the caviar supply. That'll really hurt Trudeau and his cronies. But like Putin typically, if I'm remembering correctly, doesn't really do the broad type of sweeping sanctions that the West has done against, say, Russia, or really any country they've sanctioned. Putin just really tries to hurt specific people. But yeah, if Russia really, really wanted to hurt the West, he probably could do it with just like oil and natural gas. Just flood the market. Now, with Canada, that would take a lot because the Canadian oil sands have this amazing ability to remain profitable to a point where it has to start sinking below, the price of oil has to sink below 50 Canadian dollars a barrel for them to start, that's their break-even point. Some oil sands. So, I mean, I think Russia has the reserves of oil to do it. It would really hurt his allies, though. The Saudis have come to his way of thinking, so I don't think he'll do that. He could flood the market with diamonds. Like, Russia's got as big of a storage as De Beers does in Belgium. So, I mean, there's ways he could, if he wanted to get specific revenge. But I think he'll take the more political stance where he'll start pulling allies further and further away from the West. Like, China's still relatively important, manufacturing-wise. He continues to pull Xi Jinping away from the West. He's doing the same with India. He's doing the same in Mexico. Now with the new, is it president? That may be different, but he's still able, the global south is basically all on Russia's side, so, and the global south has all the important minerals and such that we Canadians refuse to tap in our backyards. So, there's that.
Well, good old Canadian policy. Shoot ourselves in the foot.
Well, at this point, I really think we've moved from shooting to just, we're going to amputate our legs. We want to get those diversity points.
Yeah, there's people in the world that don't have legs. Let's amputate them and send them to the global south.
Yeah.
Trudeau model. Tyler, where? Well, I mean, you got your Dissident Canada, but where can people go follow you, and where can they watch your Rumble channel?
Dissident Canada on Twitter/X. So at some point I'll switch over to calling it X because now it's x.com. And Dissident Canada on Rumble, all lowercase. If you want to check me out, I talk about. Got a lot of episodes on economic policies from a dissident perspective. I really go into how money works in reality. Why banks are doing things the way they are. I also talk about populism, and I did an episode yesterday, which I don't know when this will go out, but on my take on Fauci at Congress and why, it's another optics campaign for the Republicans. I talk about all sorts of stuff. I have a great episode on the culture East versus West and why I've basically given up on, Western TV, movies, video games, you name it. I'm done. And then Fallout was the thing that broke me because Fallout is, in my opinion, mediocre at best. It's really, as someone who's played most of the Fallout games, the Lucy story is just Fallout 3. Go find your dad. Now there's some twists and turns, but you're basically rehashing that. That's the best you can do. Amazon has, is a massive company, and the best they can do is rehash a 20-year-old video game and make it into what is a 12-episode TV series. Sorry, I'm going to go watch My Hero Academia, which has all the vibes that Stan Lee created with Marvel.
Yeah, I got to get you back on, and we'll have a nerd conversation. I have a feeling if I start talking about all my favorite video games, it'll be another 2 hours.
Oh, we could probably do that easily.
Well, Tyler, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll catch you next time.
All right, see you. This was fun.